Do we need 10 seconds, 15?
We're good.
Awesome. Go ahead, Richard.
Good morning. Welcome and thank you for joining us at this special meeting of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's Board of Trustees. I'm Richard Stevens, Board Chair. First, a couple of logistics. Board members and others participating on the Zoom call, please remember to mute your microphones unless you're speaking. Also, when you begin speaking or make a motion or second to a motion, please identify yourself. A reminder that under recently enacted amendments to the North Carolina General Statutes concerning virtual meetings by public bodies, all votes will be by roll call. Additionally, all chats, instant messages, text, or other written communications between members of the board regarding the transaction of the public business during the remote meeting are deemed public records. Let me now call on Secretary Teresa Artis-Neal to call the roll.
Ms. Artis-Neal is present. Mr. Bullock.
Present.
Mr. Brown.
Present.
Mr. Kobe.
Present.
Mr. Cochran.
Present.
Mr. Davis.
Present.
Mr. Duckett.
Here.
Mrs. Hopkins.
Present.
Mr. McCullen.
Here.
Mr. Meekins.
Present.
Mr. Mosley.
Present.
Mr. Pryor.
Present.
Mr. Stevens.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, we have a quorum.
Thank you, Trustee Artis-Neal. The agenda has been shared with the board and is now available for anyone at bot.unc.edu. That's bot.unc.edu. As Chairman of the Board of Trustees, it is my responsibility to remind all members of the board of their duty under the State Government Ethics Act to avoid conflicts of interest and appearances of conflict of interest as required by this act. Each member has received the agenda and related information for the Board of Trustees meeting. If any board member knows of any conflict of interest or appearance of conflict of interest with respect to any matter coming before the Board of Trustees at this meeting, the conflict or appearance of conflict should be identified at this time. Hearing none, we will proceed. Again, thank you for being with us today. I know this is a little unusual to have a meeting between meetings, but a number of issues need your attention. And we'll be doing some discussion of those some of those in closed session shortly. But now I'd like to call on the Chancellor for any opening remarks he may have.
Great, thank you, Richard, and it's a pleasure to be with all of you. And I want to thank you for convening on such short notice. I want to just start with a few words about the events of the past few weeks. And we sent a campus message last week on diversity efforts on our campus and announced that we're really committed to redoubling our efforts with a greater sense of urgency, purpose, and action. Systemic racism is part of institutions across our country, and we have been challenged by this here in Chapel Hill over the years. But our faculty, staff, and students have pushed to make UNC better for decades, and as have you, members of our board. But it's clear that we've moved too slowly at times. We haven't done enough to be the campus community that we aspire to be at times. And I want to offer thanks to Sibby Anderson-Tompkins, Bob Bluen, Gretchen Bellamy, Ramey Alexander, Amy Locklear Hertel, and others for their tireless efforts in this regard. And I also want to take the opportunity to acknowledge and thank Patricia Parker and Jim Lalutis, who agreed to chair the History, Race, and a Way Forward Commission, which I charged back in early February. And I want to thank the commission for its early work carrying forward even during the past 4 months with the pandemic. In that February meeting where I charged the committee, we talked about the important work of this commission to build on the work of the History Task Force to recommend and identify ways to best acknowledge, curate, share, and teach the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill's historic relationship with race, and to provide recommendations to us to help move us forward. And I know that their work is continuing and will be important over these next several years. We have work to do, and I look forward to working closely with our Board of Trustees, our leadership team, and the Commission on History, Race, and a Way Forward. I also want to just take a minute to thank those of you who are working tirelessly on our roadmap for the fall 2020. We have a lot of work still ahead, but I'm very proud of the thoughtful and deliberative process that we've developed as a plan to bring students, faculty, and staff back to campus. Dr. Cohen, board member Mosley, and myself were featured on 60 Minutes this past Sunday evening. I hope you had a chance to see that, where we talked about our roadmap and the work that's gone into this alongside our infectious disease experts, public health faculty experts. And we've been meeting with faculty most recently on Monday at our faculty executive committee meeting. We've hosted webinars most recently with over 2,700 students and parents who had questions, and we provided answers to a lot of what we plan for this fall, to keeping safety first and foremost as we bring people back to campus safely. And I want to thank Reeves Mosley, Ryan Collins, and Pri Rao for moderating that session. We also, a few weeks before that, with over 4,100 faculty and staff, where we're sharing the plan. And this is an evolving roadmap and plan. But this week we announced that Bob Bluen will serve as the executive director of the roadmap. And I want to thank Bob for doing this in terms of the implementation. And we will continue to listen to our campus and work to update that roadmap based on the guidance of our infectious disease and public health experts. The plan will to ramp up our research operations started 2 weeks ago, and that's going great. And we are now underway with developing a plan for returning instruction to campus, building out our community standards, which are again have been developed with the guidance of our world-class faculty experts. So I remain confident that we will, continue to follow the guidance of these individuals and help our students, faculty, and staff return to campus safely this fall. Carolina will look and feel very different this fall, but we know our students thrive best back here on campus with access to the co-curricular and extracurricular activities and resources here on campus for their learning environment. So I just want to thank everybody who's been involved in this. As we said, I've said often, Carolina is our people, and we are doing everything we can to be together. And so thanks to all those involved. And I want to thank the board for their support in this regard. And I'm going to now turn it back to Richard.
Thank you, Chancellor. And again, thank you for your leadership and that of your team in these difficult times. We're counting on you. We know you're going to do it. And we appreciate all you're doing with your roadmap, following it closely. And well done on 60 Minutes, you and Dr. Cohen and Trustee Mosley. No further announcements. I'm going to call on Trustee Teresa Artis-Neal for a motion to go into closed session. And for those of you watching us, we will be in closed session to discuss legal matters and other issues allowed to be in closed session. I do anticipate the board to be back in open session for discussion, however, at the end of that closed session.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the board convene in closed session pursuant to North Carolina General Statutes, Section 143-318.11, subsection A, subsection 1, to prevent the disclosure of privileged information under Section 126-22, and also pursuant to Section 143-318.11, subsection A, subsection 2, subsection 3, 5, 6, subsection 7, and subsection 9.
You've heard the motion. Is there a second?
Gene Davis, second.
Seconded by Davis. If you would call the roll.
Ms. Artis-Neal, yes. Mr. Bullock,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Kobe,
Yes.
Mr. Cochran,
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Duckett,
Yes.
Mrs. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. McCullen,
Yes.
Mr. Meekins,
Yes.
Mr. Mosley,
Yes.
Mr. Pryor,
Yes.
and Mr. Stevens.
Stevens, yes.
Mr.
That's
Chairman,
unanimous.
yes.
Okay, thank you, ma'am. That is unanimous and motion passes. Ladies and gentlemen watching us, we are now going to go into closed session. Get a few minutes of time for the staff to make the necessary adjustments, and we'll be in closed session. So the board will just stand at ease momentarily until that occurs. If you let me know, TJ, when that's ready.
Okay, we're back.
Ladies and gentlemen, those of you observing our meeting, we're back from our closed session of the Board of Trustees. There is no action coming from closed session for discussion or action in the open session. So we're now in open session for other items to come up. And I'd like to start by recognizing Trustee Brown for some comments.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think my main desire or been asked to just provide a little context for discussions regarding the education curation, renaming of buildings, monuments, and markers based upon really some context for the 2015 board resolution. Several board members and I were present during 2015. And the goal of these comments is really to provide a little context for the resolutions that took place at that time. And then, Mr. Chairman, I'll turn it back to you for further discussions. But in 2015, just some context that the chair asked me to provide. In May of 2015, after extensive university community engagement, the Board of Trustees enacted 3 resolutions regarding, one, the curating the UNC campus and teaching UNC's history, also renaming of Saunders Hall to Carolina Hall, and the placing of a moratorium on the renaming of buildings, monuments, and markers. The Board of Trustees' actions followed months of engagement with and by the university community. This was by way of letters and electronic communications, listening sessions, and other board and community engagement, which was remarkably open, transparent, and participatory, and included a broader conversation on race and place at the university. I mention this because I think it is critically important that the university community recalls those efforts with the significant community engagement. In May, the resolution number 1 was relating to curating the UNC campus and teaching UNC's history. This first resolution directed the chancellor at the time and her administration to commission a task force to create historical markers for the places such as McCorkle Place and Saunders Hall that would provide a history of each place. They were to evaluate information published on other buildings, monuments, and memorials, and to study the feasibility of public space to house a permanent collection of UNC's history, as well as explore options for creating an online orientation program about UNC's history, values, contributions to society, and future directions. As part of this first directive, the Board of Trustees set forth timeframes for review and approval by the University Affairs Committee of the Board of Trustees. Regrettably, although some progress was made, work on the directives was not pursued to completion. Recently, Chancellor Guskowitz formed and charged the Commission on History, Race, and a Way Forward to pick up the work undertaken by the prior administration. The second resolution in May of 2015 involved the renaming of Saunders Hall to Carolina Hall and the explaining of the history of Saunders. That second resolution acknowledged William L. Saunders' contribution to UNC and the state of North Carolina, but stated that the university made an error in citing Mr. Saunders' leadership of the KKK during Reconstruction as a qualification for the naming honor. The board instructed the removal of William L. Saunders' name from Saunders Hall and the renaming of the building as Carolina Hall with appropriate contextualization and education regarding Saunders' history. A number of board members, I'm sure all board members have been to Carolina Hall and have seen the contextualization that's take place. We certainly, as a board member involved in 2015, encourage others to please visit Carolina Hall. In May of 2015, resolution number 3 dealt with the moratorium on renaming of buildings, monuments, memorials, and landscapes. The board's third resolution at that time declared a 16-year moratorium on renaming of buildings, monuments, memorials, and landscapes to provide adequate time for the new education and curation efforts and initiatives to take effect. Those were the actions in 2015, Mr. Chairman, that I think you wanted to be able to place into the record.
Thank you, Trustee Brown. You and Trustee Duckett, Trustee Hopkins, and Trustee Cochran were here for that time period. The rest of us were not, and we appreciate your reminding us of the good work that you all did back then and continue to do since on this issue. And I want to open the floor up for discussion by members of the board.
Mr. Chairman,
Who was that? I'm sorry, Trustee Bullock.
Trustee Bullock, sorry. I guess the assumption here is that we're going to have a discussion in open session with respect to issues around naming and the feeling on campus and the I guess the emotions and the I guess welcome mat that certain names on buildings may present to incoming students, faculty, and the general public. I would say this, and I understand these are times of COVID. I am willing, able, and ready to engage in all discussions and to roll up my sleeves and get busy. I find it very difficult to do via Zoom. And I think that if this board is ready to take courageous steps to move the university forward, we need to do it in person. And we need, even if it requires masks and sitting 6 feet apart, but we've got athletes on campus and we've got administrative personnel going back to campus, and we have a roadmap to go back to campus. So I would just throw it out there that, again, I'm fine to continue the meeting in Zoom and do whatever the will of this board is, because I took an oath and a responsibility to serve the university, but it's very difficult to do via Zoom. And I understand we're in unprecedented times, but we do have the technology on campus and the availability of space on campus.
Thank you, Trustee Bullock. And I shared some of your sentiment, obviously, in terms of frustration of having to have a meeting like this in Zoom and not in person. Trustee Davis, I think you were asking to be recognized. Did we lose you? Trustee Davis? TJ, did we lose Gene?
It looks like he might have stepped away or his camera's muted.
Chair Stevens, Ralph Meekins, I guess, are we talking about perhaps the removing the moratorium? Is that what we're going to be talking about first? Before
We can talk whatever the board chooses.
I would imagine that would be the first thing to talk about.
I think so. Trustee Davis, are you back? He has to be recognized, and I was just trying to do that. But
Richard, I
others,
think he dropped off.
okay.
might have lost connection.
Well,
He
Mr.
lost
Chairman,
internet. He lost internet. I just got a text from that he lost internet. I guess that's a public record now. So the records show that Gene lost internet. Okay.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, then I'll make a motion at this point if it's appropriate.
Motion from trustee Bullock.
And that motion is to lift the 16-year moratorium on renaming of buildings on University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill campus.
Let me ask you for clarification of that. And I'd ask, anticipating that might come up, that our attorney draft an appropriate motion. And I'm trying to find that. It would say, I think this was your motion, that you would move to repeal resolution number 3 adopted on May 28th, 2015, which declared a freeze on renaming buildings, monuments, memorials, and landscapes for a period of 16 years. Is that
That
the
is
intent of your motion? That's the
Yes,
intent of your motion.
yes, sir.
We
Yes,
have
sir.
a motion from trustee Bullock. Is there a second?
Second,
Second from
Meekins.
Meekins, second. Okay, now we're open for discussion by anyone on the board.
Mr. Chairman, this is John Pryor.
Trustee Pryor.
I heard Mr. Bullock suggest that we do this in person, and I know that you were kind enough to call around and canvass board members about this meeting last week. Is there a compelling reason why we need to discuss this today as opposed to the scheduled meeting in July?
Well, we're in session. There was a considerable amount of discussion among individuals about the need to discuss this matter and potentially take action. We don't meet again until the 15th, 16th of July in our current schedule. That's a month from now. But we're here, we're meeting, we have a motion on the floor in a second.
And I saw the statement, the guidelines that the chancellor was kind enough to send out last night. I know that I got mine at 10:45 last night. I had just a minute to look at it this morning before this call, and I feel that we are rushing to do something as opposed to taking the proper amount of time to get it right, as opposed to try and do something in a way that is not sort of giving due justice to what we want to do here and do it the right way.
Mr. Chairman.
Trustee Bolt.
Yeah, so my motion is just to lift the moratorium.
Yeah, your motion was not about other guidelines at this point. Is
I'm
that
not
correct?
making a motion to adopt any guidelines. I'm not making a motion to rename any buildings. My motion is to lift the moratorium. I personally feel comfortable with that motion over Zoom. I agree with Trustee Pryor that anything further than that, we need to have the ability to meet in person and to hammer out, roll up our sleeves and get real work done in person. I feel very strongly about that. And I'm not meaning that in a way to put off anybody or to put off swift movement, because we all took an oath to be on the board. And if we've got to rearrange our schedule to get together tonight for that matter, we may have to do it if there's that big a sense of urgency. And I'd like, if that's the will of the board, but just to lift in terms of lifting the moratorium, I'm comfortable doing that over Zoom, and maybe I'm contradicting myself, but it's not a motion to rename anything at this point or to adopt any resolution other than lifting the moratorium.
Thank you, Mr. Bullock. Trustee Davis, you had asked for the floor and then you lost internet, so let me call on you.
Absolutely. Just wanted to, and I'm sorry that I lost internet there for a bit. So I don't know exactly what happened in the intervening time, but it appears that Mr. Bullock has made a motion to go ahead and end the moratorium or repeal the resolution 3 that was adopted by the Board of Trustees on May 28th, 2015, which declared a freeze on renaming buildings, monuments, memorials, and landscapes for a period of 16 years.
That's
If that was
correct.
the motion that Mr. Bullock made, I am seconding that motion.
Okay, it was already seconded, Trustee Davis. That's the motion he made, and it's already seconded. So
Very good.
discussion now.
Mr. Chairman.
Chair Stevens.
Chair
Excuse me.
Cochran. Chair Cochran.
Yes. Chair Stevens, are there any other factors, forces, pressures that would indicate that we need to move faster than perhaps we would like for something of this significance? Are there outside forces that would have a shorter time frame than a longer time frame?
Forces, I'm not sure I follow your question. We obviously had,
Organizations, things on campus, things that have come to us by way of communication, maybe not by resolution or suggestion, but by communication. Are there outside pressures to do something immediately?
we've had recommendations on this issue for months. I don't know about specific pressures. I don't personally react well to pressures, but the topic is timely. We indicated to each of you that we'll be discussing it today. We do have a motion on the floor.
Chair Stevens, may I add something?
Trustee Reeves.
So there have been, countless discussions and pressures from the Carolina community on, given recent events, that the moratorium should be lifted. And I'm sure a lot of you have seen the petition. I've mentioned it a few times. And the petition to repeal the 16-year freeze on renaming campus buildings at UNC-Chapel Hill is nearing 9,000 in just a couple of days. So in regard to public pressure, that's rising by the minute. And I fear as if we don't act on this now, then we'll be seen as complicit in the perpetuation of allowing, the moratorium to exist. So I think we don't have time to not act on it now.
Thank you, Trustee Mosley.
Mr. Chair, can I speak?
I'm sorry, who's next?
Alan Rudd.
Trustee McCollum, if you just identify yourself, please. Trustee McCollum.
Alan Ray McCullen, yes, I totally agree with what John Pryor said. If we jump off and change things every time we hear a rumor that the students may demonstrate, we're gonna let the prisoners run to prison. And this is totally ridiculous when I've been trying to speak here and my machine's not working. This needs to be done in person. There's no reason to do it this way. And if we do allow the moratorium to be ended by the next meeting, we will have a tractor trailer load of names that need changing.
Okay. Thank you for
Alan
your
Ray,
comment.
let me say something. I mean,
Okay. Trustee Meekins.
what Reeves have just said is so obvious to us if you're
Yes.
watching television any minute of the day. Our country is in turmoil. We've got serious issues we've got to address. I don't care if I'm on Zoom. I don't care if I'm in person. I can do it by phone. It's very easy to say, we got to act and we need to act now. That doesn't mean we need to make important decisions now. But one decision we can make very easily is to end the moratorium so that we can then discuss and make decisions about how far we're going to go with changing names at our university that we all love. So I think most people agree we don't need to meet in person to decide this issue. Whether we go further today or next week or in our next meeting in July, that's going to be up to us and our chair, and we'll make that decision. But as far as this particular vote, I don't think we need to be meeting in person whatsoever.
Mr. Chairman,
We next have Teresa Artis Neal.
Mr. Chairman, I agree with what was just said. As a new trustee, I never understood the length for 16 years anyway. I think this is a time for us to say, let's lift the moratorium and move forward and allow the freedom to move forward. And so I would agree, definitely, this is the time. Things have changed enough. The temperature of the country has changed enough. It needs to be lifted.
Thank you. I think Trustee
Mr.
Hopkins.
Chairman, Trustee Hopkins, thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
I want to be thoughtful in the way I present this. We are in a different climate, and I support the comments of the fellow trustees. However, I would like to move to postpone this matter until we consider looking at resolution number 1. And that is curating the UNC campus and teaching UNC's history. I feel that before we lift the moratorium, resolution number 3, the freeze on naming buildings, it's essential that we consider to support the results that came out of a presentation from the Chancellor's Cabinet on the Saunders Solution Review, and that was to the importance of curation in education. So before we move forward on lifting the moratorium, I think it's important that we make a motion, or I make a motion, to further support and the continuation of the curation on the campus and teaching our UNC's history.
I'll accept that as a substitute motion to the original motion. Is there a second?
It's Allen Ray, I'll second.
Second from Allen Ray. The effect, as I understand it, of the discussion vote on the substitute motion, if it carries, the original motion goes away and the secondary motion, the substitute motion prevails. Should the vote on the substitute motion fail, we go back to the original motion. So now it's discussion only on the substitute motion, not the original motion.
I have a question regarding the new motion.
Yeah.
Teresa?
What I could get clarification on is education seen as something that could not happen at the same time that the moratorium is lifted? I strongly agree with Trustee Hopkins that we need to have orientation, that we need to have education. And I also am concerned that it didn't happen as asked by trustees in 2015. But the question I have now is, why can't that still continue as part of the charge of the new commission, even if we lift the moratorium now? Why is it seen as an either or?
Yeah, Chairman.
Trustee
Stevens,
Brown?
this is, I would agree with Teresa's comments. I feel very strongly as Trustee Hopkins that the education and curation components need to be lifted up and need to be strongly considered. I do think we do have the History Commission. I think that should work in consultation with the board as a continuation of the board's directives on resolution number 1, which was the education and curation. And I think perhaps as an addendum or an add to the resolution lifting the moratorium, that we emphasize that that's an important part. But I believe that you can move forward with the moratorium being lifted and at the same time strongly emphasize the importance of education and curation, and doing it in a manner consistent with our values, which include values of open debate and dialogue, in a way that we can find ourselves in the best place as a board. So I would not support the motion, substitute motion on its own, but I'm supporting, I think, the impulses of the substitute motion as part of the primary motion.
Trustee Brown.
Chairman Stevens, I'd like just to make an observation.
Trustee Kobe.
Yes, I think that as you look back on what the resolutions and what the result of the resolutions were, that possibly having such a long dated moratorium probably impeded the process of curation. And I think that lifting the moratorium will actually accelerate the process of curation and examination of each of the cases of the building. So I would be in support of no on or against the second proposal and to go back to the first proposal.
Chairman.
Trustee Davis. Trustee Davis.
Yes, Chairman. In light of what I certainly agree, I think that what Jeff said was spot on, that it should be in combination. And so I would like to propose an amendment that brings both of them together, which is one, the moratorium, lifting the moratorium, but two, with immediacy, requiring that the university move forward with the education component, the curation component, the museum component, all of the things that were promised in 2015 that have not yet been done need to be addressed in addition to lifting the moratorium. So I would propose that in the form of a substitute amendment.
Or, well, it would be a substitute, it would be an amendment to the substitute motion. Is that correct? Can you state your motion? Can you state your amendment? Trustee Davis, had a chance to jot that down yet?
I have not. I will, but it is essentially taking the elements of Resolution 1 from 2015, which I am trying to track down in my files. I was not on the board at that time, but I have read those amendments and I can't seem to find them right here. But taking the requirements which related to an education component for the community, incoming students, incoming faculty and staff, existing students, faculty and staff, and the broader community. It included curation and contextualization in addition to a museum. All of those pieces were to have been addressed, have not been, through no fault of anyone on this board, have not been addressed, and there needs to be an immediacy in taking action on those, in addition to an immediacy on lifting the moratorium. And I'll tell you that I believe that Dr. King spoke about the arc of the moral universe bending towards justice. And there are moments as it bends when there are huge leaps forwards towards justice. And this is, in my view, as a nation and as a world, one of those moments. And we need, as a university, to lead on it. And a part of that is moving forward with the things promised in 2015. And a part of that is lifting the moratorium, in my view.
Mr. Chairman?
Trustee Bullock, on the amendment.
Yes. I just wanted to I want some clarification. Item number 1 in the original 2015 packet, I'm not making a motion to do away with that. I'm simply making a motion to lift the moratorium. And I feel like if we add anything additional to that particular motion, it waters down the notion of the fact of whether this board has the, I guess, the direction of lifting the moratorium. So I would oppose any amendments to my motion or substitute motions. I would ask the board to strongly consider one motion to lift the moratorium. And then if we, it's up to the chancellor and the administration to execute on the previous policies set by this board. So that would be a motion to, I guess, ask the chancellor and his staff and the team to, with immediacy, move forward with things that are already in place. I don't know that we need to change anything because item number 1 on that list of actions from 2015 would still be in place even if the moratorium is lifted.
Chair Stevens, if I can respond to that. I'm sorry, Dave, when you're finished, Dave.
Well, I'm not meaning that as an indictment on the administration or on anybody related to the university. All I'm simply saying is that, as Trustee Artis Neal pointed out, the temperature of the country is at a different point. I do believe that anything further than a motion and just to lift the moratorium requires some high fidelity discussion. To use one of Bob Lewin's words, high quality, high fidelity discussion at a high level as we move forward with the consequences of removing the moratorium. But it's just my belief that removing the moratorium is the first step, and anything further, I do believe, needs to be in person. I've stated that. I'm not going to belabor that point again. So I would oppose any substitute motions.
Thank you, Trustee Bolt. I've been trying to give everybody a chance to speak, and I haven't myself. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the time for this board to lead strongly. I would support what Trustee Bullock just had to say. I really believe we need to be clear and concise and simply remove the moratorium. As he said to you, Resolution 1 is in place. Nothing has, his motion, original motion does not change that. I would urge the board to, and actually, Trustee Davis, I would urge you to withdraw your amendment. If we need to vote on the other motion, let's do that. But let's just do the moratorium today as our item of action at this point, and not the other motion. I would oppose, in other words, both the amendment and the substitute motion.
Mr. Chairman, I'm willing to withdraw my amendment.
And I am as well, Chairman.
Okay, so both the amendment to the substitute motion and the substitute motion have been withdrawn. We're back on discussion on the original motion, which is to, in essence, remove the moratorium. Is there further discussion on that motion?
Yes.
Okay,
Mr. Chair,
Trustee Duckett. Trustee Duckett.
This is going to take a minute, but I just want to map some things out. I don't have a problem with the singular discussion to remove the moratorium. But I would like to point out, because we get a lot of emails and things from different sides with suggestions, demands, etc. And when we did this back in 2015, I want to explain a couple of things. The moratorium was set so that all of the education, curation, and all
I think we just lost your transmission.
Hello?
We just lost your transmission, Chuck. Give him a second to come back.
Frozen on a point.
He's frozen. Until he comes back, he'll have the floor when he gets back. Is there anyone else that would like to speak while we're waiting for Trustee Duckett to come back?
I just agree with what you said, Richard. I mean, I think, we're living in unprecedented times. Dr. King also said justice delayed is justice denied. That's the most important thing he said from that on this particular subject. And I think we need to move forward very quickly to make this decision, and then we can decide how we're going to make the other difficult decisions either today or down the road, next week, whenever. But some decisions need to be made based upon information that I've learned here recently about some of these folks that we have buildings named after.
Thank you, Trustee Meekins. Any others? TJ, you're trying to get Trustee Duckett back.
Richard, may I make a comment?
Yes, sir. Chancellor.
I just want to thank everybody for the conversation. I do want to say that, when we charged the History, Race, and Way Forward Commission back in early February, we made it very clear, and I mentioned this in my opening comments, that they would build on the work of the History Task Force to recommend and identify ways to best acknowledge, curate, share, and teach the University of North Carolina Chapel Hill's history and historic relationship with race, and to develop and inform the curriculum. So they're going to provide recommendations back to me and to the board. They have been very clear in telling me, and I've shared this with others, that they feel they can carry out their work in a more trustworthy and I think meaningful way in a partnership with all of us if that moratorium were to be lifted. We've talked a lot about that moratorium over these 5 years, and I think in talking with some of those who were involved with it at the time, they, I think, acknowledged that society would dictate when change was needed. And I think we've talked a lot today about the times have changed over these 5 years. A lot has changed. And so I just think that they will be able to carry out their work. And I am confident, and I will work alongside them to ensure that their work is done in a meaningful way, and it does lift up that earlier work, which was really important in terms of creating a foundation for moving us forward. It's a 3-year commission, so there's a lot of work ahead. I'm confident that they can do it best if the moratorium were to be lifted.
Thank you, Chancellor. Trustee Duckett, you got cut off, and we want to give you a chance to speak. So please continue.
I'm sorry, my internet crashed. So I was trying, I don't even know what you saw, so I apologize. The moratorium was just a placeholder so that all that work could be done about educating. We are an educational institution. We have a responsibility to be a great educational institution. I think one of the things about this that gets frustrating is that thousands and thousands of hours went into those resolutions. They may not seem that way, but they did. And some very important work started, and in my opinion, was a little bit ahead of its time, which I think is indicative of the way Carolina should and is intended to move. With this, I have no problem removing the moratorium on renaming, but I think what I'm most frustrated by is some of the emails and the people that contact me to say, don't do anything, don't change anything, you can't change history. This isn't about changing history. It doesn't have anything to do with history. You cannot change history. But I find it interesting as a fairly conservative fiscal, I'm a conservative fiscal person, but you never know where I'm going to be on social stances. And I think that's part of being educated and changing your mind and talking to good people that can convince you possibly that maybe your stance is wrong. I think what we need to look at and understand here is whether you're conservative, independent, whatever you are, that's not what this is about. This is about leading. It's about being a great institution, and it's about doing the right thing. Now, we've got names on this campus that even if a name is gone, I don't think the names over the doors matter. It's not my line, but Reverend Bob Seymour told me something when I couldn't talk to Coach Smith about Saunders Hall. And he said he didn't believe that Coach Smith would think that the name above the door mattered. What matters is who's in the door to meet you. And what are they welcoming to you? This place is a welcoming place. We need to be welcoming others. We need to be the best public university in the world. And part of this is, what are we celebrating with these names? How long do these names really matter? I'm not the same as everybody else. I think that we have names that celebrate people that did a lot of things for Carolina because that was part of their life. And we need to be careful what we do, whether what they did for Carolina overrules some other things. That's why policy is going to come in down the road at some point. But I think we need to understand in the matter, just in the papers today, of Josephus Daniels and all of this, the guy helped overthrow a legal government in the state of North Carolina that threw out the Republican Party and the fusion movement, which was way progressive ahead of its time and started and initiated the Jim Crow times. Now, that does not disparage the entire Daniels name, because Frank and Julia, all these people are great people that have given their life. And even as he ran the paper, did incredibly progressive things to enable and help the state of North Carolina back when they ran it. But I would think that it's important that we not be afraid to step forward and lead. Conservatives can lead and give rights to everybody and do what did not get done in the Civil Rights Act, which is to grant true equality, but also respect. That's what this is about as much as anything. And so I have no problem lifting the moratorium, but I think it's important to understand the campus has not delivered on this. We asked them to in 2015. It's prior people. I'm not throwing anybody particularly under the bus, but I was on the board. We didn't force it to happen. Other things came up, but we've got to celebrate things. And I'll give an example. This is not a motion. I want to be clear. We can lead as a board, though, and help this task force, this history committee. Our job is to be advisors. But I am for removing this barrier. But I want to see things change where Josephus Daniels is not celebrated, and this is an example. But we celebrate someone like Charles Scott. We celebrate a true academic All-American, a true color barrier busting person that came down here to help advance this university. Great basketball player, but he's been recognized for all the athletics. I'm giving examples because we have not had that come back. We have talked about contextualization. I have all this stuff. We've approved things before. It's time that this university stand up, regardless of the pressure, and say, what do we stand for? What are we going to do?
higher education, research. And I'll give you another example. We can't throw all of these people out because they lived in a time where a lot of people were white supremacists. We're being told today, so many people are now. Think about it then and how easy it was. It was accepted and in some aspects. Doesn't make it right. But we had people here that led this university that turned it into this research institution that it is, that puts the chancellor and Mike Cohen on 60 Minutes and Reeves. And it shows we're leading. We're leading because of some of these people. Let's not throw all that out. But also we have great world-class professors that can teach this history. We're not going to run from that. So all I'm saying is, I think that we need to push, but we need to help in that too. It's not just all saying yes or no. There's far more to it. Zoom meetings are frustrating. I've lost internet 3 times. I feel very passionately about this. Lead, follower, get out of the way. And I think that we need to go further myself, but I'm willing to lift the moratorium. We need to go further, and I would make I'm not making the motion, but I want to because I think it's the right thing to do. But I want to celebrate what we're capable of now and in the future. And what we do now, today, in the future around Chapel Hill and how we interact with people and one another is the stage that matters. Not really some of this stuff. Some of this stuff's overblown. We all know it on some of these names. We need to stop celebrating people that blocked the progress of this state and celebrate some people that helped this university advance this state. Thank you.
Thank you,
Chairman,
Trustee Davis.
I'd like to make a motion that we move to a vote. I call the question on the motion by Mr. Bullock.
Question has been called. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second.
Bullock.
Okay. The motion's been made and second is not debatable. The question before the board is the calling of the question to move to immediate vote. We'll need to call the roll on that. This is just the motion to call the question. Trustee Neal.
Okay. Ms. Artis Neal, yes. Mr. Bullock,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Kobe,
Yes.
Mr. Cochran,
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Duckett,
Yes.
Mrs. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. McCullen,
Yes.
Mr. Meekins,
Yes.
Mr. Mosley,
Yes.
Mr. Pryor,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes.
It's unanimous.
A unanimous vote. The motion, the question has been called. There can be no further debate. We will proceed to a vote on the original motion from Trustee Bullock. Does anyone need that reread to them? Or are you good with the motion we're about to vote on? Okay, proceed if you would. Trustee Artis Neal with the roll call on the motion.
Ms. Artis Neal, yes. Mr. Bullock,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Kobe,
Yes.
Mr. Cochran,
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Duckett,
Yes.
Mrs. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. McCullen,
No.
Mr. Meekins,
Yes.
Mr. Mosley,
Yes.
Mr. Pryor,
No.
Mr.
Stevens.
Yes. I believe the vote is 11-2. The motion passes.
Chairman,
Yes, sir.
I'd like to make a motion that we go back into closed session.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Bullock, I second that motion.
We need to have a specific.
What? Yeah, what for?
Yeah, what's the specific section that you're requesting, Trustee
Hold on.
Davis?
Let me pull up the, I believe it was section 2 or section 3. Hold on.
Mr. Chairman, it's John Pryor.
Wait a minute, we've got a motion coming on the floor. I'll give you a chance just as soon as he finishes motion.
I'll tell you what, let me find the section and then I'll circle right back.
Okay, trustee Pryor.
Mr. Chairman, I was just going to say, I've heard several of my board member colleagues and friends and the chancellor all reference the need for the university to lead on this, and I agree with that wholeheartedly. But I want to just say that, in my experience, sometimes leadership is more about doing the hard thing than the easy thing. And what we are doing right now is very important for all kind of reasons. And I just feel that we need to be very deliberate about this. The easy thing is to rush through it, and I really hope that we are not about to do that, because that would not be leadership. That would be an abdication of leadership.
Thank you, trustee Pryor.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Brown.
and maybe while we're waiting for trustee Davis, I did want to maybe make a suggestion. I can put it in the form of a motion, but I'd like to make a suggestion as it relates to the material we did receive on the interim guidelines, that we have a group that is formed working with the chancellor and his team to take that material and to consider input from other board members. I thought trustee Pryor's comment, we were receiving this, appropriately as best we could, but in a relatively short order. So before the next meeting of the board, whenever that will occur, I think a group should take the guidelines that you might appoint to get input from board members, work with the chancellor, so we can be in a place where we have some interim guidelines for consideration at our next opportunity.
Chairman,
Trustee Davis.
I'd like to make a motion that we recess.
Why don't we just call a recess rather than making a motion and voting on it? I think we've been in session now for a while.
Can we do a 15-minute recess?
Can we
Please?
do a 15-minute recess? And I have 10:07. Can we come back at 10:22?
Thank you, Chairman.
The board will be in recess until 10:22.
Thank you.
All right, good luck. Thank you. Bye.
Jeff, can you hear me? Clayton?
Hello? Hello?
Still in recess, Haywood. We'll let you know.
Thanks, TJ. Hello? 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 Okay. Hello? TJ?
Still on hold. Just in recess.
Okay.
Everybody can mute.
No problem. Okay, thank you.
TJ, everyone back from break?
Up to you, sir.
Just check and see if everyone's back.
Yes.
I don't see Gene Davis. I don't see Monroe Kobe. Don't see Chancellor. I now see Monroe. I now see Gene. Still don't see the Chancellor yet. Looks like they're back on the-
Sorry, I've been here. I just had my video off.
Gotcha.
Sorry, Richard.
There he
Got
is.
you. And do we have John and Haywood and are you back on?
Hayward is on.
John Pryor's on.
Okay. All right. We're back in session. I'd like to recognize at his request, Trustee Allie Ray McCullen for personal privilege comment.
We're live.
Mr. Chairman, can you
Yes,
hear
sir.
me?
Yes, sir. You have the floor.
I'd like to apologize for a poor choice of words when I made my statement against the motion. I don't view UNC-Chapel Hill as a prison, and certainly the students are not prisoners. And I apologize and hope you'll forgive me.
Thank you, Trustee.
Chairman,
Okay. Trustee Davis.
I'd just like to say thank you to Trustee McCullen for offering that apology. It's an emotional issue for everyone, and sometimes we all say things that in a moment that are not meant, and appreciate him saying that, and appreciate I certainly know his deep love for the university and for the students, and so appreciate you offering that apology, Trustee McCullen.
Thank you, Trustee Davis.
Mr. Chairman,
Trustee Pryor.
I just want to echo what Gene just said, Trustee Davis, about Trustee McCullen, who I've known a long, long time, and I know loves the university. And we all tend to shoot from the lip sometimes, and I know that that was meant in jest, and that is exactly how I took it. So thank you.
Thank you. We all respect Trustee McCullen. He's a man of integrity, and we appreciate your coming back to us very quickly and with your apologies. So much appreciated. I heard a number of you, and I want to be respectful of that we need more time, and you didn't have enough time with the draft document that the Chancellor and some of us helped put together late last night. I really would like each member of the board to take time with that. It's not a lengthy document, but we've taken action on the moratorium. That has been done, and I think you've led in a very powerful and significant way. I do think there's some important next steps. That's not the end of our process, I hope. I do think we need to have some guidelines of now having done that, what's next? And so having said that, I'm not proposing that we discuss that today. What I'd like to do is continue or set up a subgroup of the board, not an official committee, but just an ad hoc group of Trustees Davis, Artis Neal, Duckett, and Bolick to take an in-depth look at that draft in concert with the Chancellor and his team and get back with us as soon as possible. We can call another meeting. We can do that in person. We can do it whatever is a comfort level for the entire board so you feel good about where we're headed. Don't want to force anything. You need and deserve a proper time. These are important matters. They deserve significant attention. So your points are very well taken, all of you who made those, about not pushing anything further today. We've made a tremendous step today, but again, it's a first step. And so we'd like to take a look at these guidelines if that group would do that in concert with the Chancellor. And so I don't have any other business before the board, but I would like to recognize the Chancellor for some remarks before we do adjourn. And then obviously if anybody else has anything to add. Chancellor.
Thank you, Chair Stevens. I want to thank you for your leadership, and I want to thank the board for their thoughtful and heartfelt deliberations and decision today. This puts us on a road to take meaningful actions that we've talked about on many occasions, and I think this is a really important next step. The history of our university mirrors that of our nation, and our campus has struggled with reconciling our history, just as many other universities have. Our faculty, staff, and students have pushed to make UNC better for decades, and you have as well. And for that, we're grateful. To be the nation's leading global public research university, we need a deeper commitment to reconciling our own history of racial injustice with a commitment to racial equity and inclusivity. And I'm confident that our History, Race, and a Way Forward Commission will work with us in a collaborative way to accelerate changes, the changes that our campus community has longed for. So by lifting the moratorium today, we give that History, Race, and a Way Forward Commission the latitude that it needs to fulfill its mission and to complete the work initiated by the History Task Force in 2015, 2017 that we talked about today. Today's actions send a clear message to the Carolina community that we are committed to working to study and learn from our past. And I know that we will create a future history in which every member of our campus community knows they belong and can thrive here on campus as we carry out our strategic plan, Carolina Next. And that is what our university, the nation, and the world deserve and demand of this great university that we're all so proud of. So thank you for listening to the voices of our community and for being part of this effort. And I look forward to the next steps.
Chancellor, thank you. Very well said. I appreciate, of course, your leadership, but on this particular issue, are there other items to come before the board today?
Chairman Gene Davis, I'd like
Chair
to.
Stevens,
Well, hold on. Davis first, then Cochran.
I'll defer to Chair Cochran.
Chair Stevens,
Yes,
I
sir.
wonder if we know when this decision would be shared with the media.
Well, I can tell you it's already out there.
Yeah,
Our meetings were broadcast live. I've already read a News and Observer article about it. We will have our normal after board meeting press availability. Joe, have you set the time for that?
We will at the conclusion. We want to give the media
Sure.
time to be able to plan their schedule, but likely within an hour.
Okay. Yes, Trustee Cochran, we do that as always after all of our meetings.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Okay.
Chair Stevens.
I think we have a motion coming from Trustee Davis.
Yes, sir. Chair Stevens, like to make a motion that we adjourn.
Adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Discussion.
Second by Cochran. A motion to adjourn is not debatable. So we'll take a vote. If you would, call the roll.
Ms. Artis Neal, yes. Mr. Bolick,
Yes.
Mr. Brown,
Yes.
Mr. Kobe,
Yes.
Mr. Cochran,
Yes.
Mr. Davis,
Yes.
Mr. Duckett,
Yes.
Mrs. Hopkins,
Yes.
Mr. McCullen,
Yes.
Mr. Meekins,
No, I'd like to make a comment.
Mr. Mosley,
Yes.
Mr. Pryor,
Yes.
Mr. Stevens.
Yes, and motion passes, and we do stand adjourned. However, while we're here, I'd like to allow Trustee Meekins to make a comment.
Just very briefly, I just want to say this. First of all, I thank the good Lord that we have a fine chancellor that we have that's running this university at this very difficult time because of all that's going on, all that he's already been through, all that we're going to face in the future. And this body, you as Chair Stevens, I think you've done an excellent job getting us to this point. My only comment is this, we all know that there are protests going on around us. There will be protests on our campus. And I think it's important because I've talked to every one of you. And I think you all agree with me and have wonderful hearts. You want to do something about what's going on. We're not delaying this for the purposes of delay. We're delaying any decisions with respect to some of these names because we want to make sure we do it right. And I've heard Mr. Pryor say that and others make that comment. But I also want them to know that we want to make changes. And I've heard some things about some of these past leaders, about their lives that were horrifying to me. And they need to know from all of us that we're not going to hear them and see their petitions and their comments without taking action. I've been called a racist simply because I'm on this board, which bothered me to no end. And I know that not to be true of any of you. So I just think it's important that the message we send, even though we're not taking action today, that we will be soon, whatever that action may be. And so I guess I would just want them to know that. I think it's important.
Thank you, Trustee Meekins. And I would just say in conclusion, we have taken action today, a very significant action, and it is only a first step. We do have more work to do, and we will do it together. And our task force will go to work immediately, working with the Chancellor and his team, and we will be back together as soon as practicable. We are adjourned. Hope everyone has a really good rest of their week. Thank you so much for taking the time today to meet in special session. We do stand adjourned.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Teresa